The next session is called Going into Fear, but Don't Be Scared. So one of the reasons I'm here today was my realization in and I'm a climate reporter, by the way, with the New York Times, was my realization in 2019 that I was utterly consumed by climate heartbreak. I couldn't understand how everyone around me wasn't mourning what was happening to the planet, what was happening to vanishing species, what was happening to forests and oceans and to us all. I'd be that Debbie Downer at dinner parties going, "Don't enjoy this nice weather." And I wrote an op-ed about it for the Times about my quest to look for a balm for my eco-grief. And that set in motion my transition to becoming a climate reporter. It is hard to get anything done when you're paralyzed by difficult emotions about the climate. The American Psychological Association says that more than 2/3 of Americans experience climate anxiety. And for the first time, the most recent IPCC report called out the mental health toll of climate change. Anxiety is just one of the many emotions that come up trying to get our heads and our hearts around the climate crisis. Before we bring on our guests, which include the amazing meditation leader, Brach, we're going to do more audience interaction. And by round of applause again, who would say they struggle with anxiety around climate change? Who would say that anxiety gets in the way of you doing climate work? Who thinks it's weird to be clapping for anxiety? All right, I'm going to take a seat now, and I'll say before we do that, one of the upsides and the thing that's helped me is there's never been more people aware of this or working on this issue ever in the history. So among them, the two amazing young activists that are going to be coming up on the stage now, two young climate activists who have had to navigate this along with the perils of burnout at very tender ages. Leah is an intersectional environmental activist based down in Southern California, who wrote the book, Intersectional Environmentalist. And from the Bay Area, Hannah Estrada is an activist with the excellent, the group that, this is the group Youth versus the Apocalypse, so, amazing name. So thank you both for being here. You're so welcome to this stage. And for the audience, we would love to hear you on your pieces of paper. Write down, any solace or where you find solace when dealing with emotions about the climate crisis. What are tools you would like to share? And you can write them down on your cards, and they will magically appear, or something will appear on my screen, and we'll hopefully get to chat about it. So, Hannah first. I'm going to ask each of you what made you decide to go into climate work. And Hannah, let's start with you.
Yeah. I actually fell into climate work accidentally. I learned about environmental racism and environmental classism when I was 14 through a program in Oakland. And from there, I started organizing with Youth versus Apocalypse against the proposed coal terminal in West Oakland. And it was working with Youth versus Apocalypse, which is a group that is connecting the climate crisis to environmental degradation in poor Black and brown communities, that I actually learned what climate change was through actually just doing climate work. And after that, I just couldn't stop. It just didn't make sense for me to. So now 5 years later, I'm here.
5 years, so she's an ancient 19 now, and, and on stage. And Leah, what about you? How did you get involved in climate activism?
So I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, in Florissant, if anyone is familiar. Okay. So yeah, and I just really wanted to go to school in California, as many Missourians do. And I decided to study environmental science and policy, honestly not because I loved it, but because my mom said I needed to be a scientist, and it sounded like the funnest science, which it was not. But unfortunately, during that time, that's when back home the Ferguson uprisings happened. So that hit really close to home and kind of started the Black Lives Matter movement. And then I was in an all-white environmental science and policy class, and I really just started thinking about the right for everyone to breathe and every sense of that, terminology. So I decided to just dive into it and do everything I could in the environmental space, from being a park ranger intern to working on the communications team at Patagonia, doing GIS and environmental research and things like that, and really focusing on the intersections of climate and culture and identity. So, yeah.
Excellent. So Hannah, I'm going to bounce back to you. And we chatted about this before. How often would you say you come up against sort of emotional pain around what you do?
Yeah.
And how do you cope?
I would say that there are two main feelings for me that come up when I think about the climate crisis. And the first, you guys have probably heard of it, is climate anxiety, right? The big question mark that is, what is my future going to look like? And a more recent one that I've been able to identify, well, not more recent, but I finally have a word for it, which is, you mentioned it earlier, which is grief, which is that I go through a little bit of a grief process when I think about Black and brown and low-income communities who right now are dealing with climate disaster, who don't have room to be anxious about it because they're confronting it as we speak. And so I grieve for those communities, I grieve for the past of our communities, and I also grieve for the big question mark that is our future. So I would say those are the two most constant emotions, and I think I feel them on a day-to-day basis.
And how do you process them? How do you metabolize them?
I will want to preface by saying, as a young person, I am still figuring out how to build my emotional toolbox.
Oh, I don't think you'd be alone in that.
But I will say that the best thing that I've done, the only thing that has made a dent in this heavy emotional load that I'm sure all of us carry, is organizing, and is being with community when I'm organizing, and connecting and being able to hold space for each other and get those gems, because that's where those little drops of hope come from for me, is when you're seeing 20,000 young people that you were a part of getting them there, field trips and lunches and teachers who signed up to do it, and you helped organize all of that, seeing all of those different parts come together and knowing that you played your part and you did what you had to do, that is, for me, is the biggest thing. And then seeing also, when you're in organizing spaces, all the people that are just like you trying to carry their load as a community, as a local and a global community, it's the only thing I think that really keeps me going in this.
Leah, what about yourself? Do you come up against those difficult emotions? And we've talked, when we chatted before, about what has been a big chasm between often, majority white environmentalist groups versus civil rights causes. So for you, it's a lot. This is a big question. But for you, how do you deal with difficult emotions? Do you come up against them?
I do all the time, and it's hard because I don't know. So I often ask the question, like, how many times can a heart break, and how many ways, and where does it plateau? I think with a lot of communities of color, when I think about anxiety, I can ask, are you anxious because of the housing crisis? Are you anxious because of police brutality? Are you anxious because there's not enough fresh produce in your neighborhood or not enough trees? And then maybe the 100th question that I might ask is, are you anxious because of the hypothetical but very real future that might happen 50 to 100 years from now? And I think that's the disconnect at times sometimes for lower income communities and communities of color and myself, is because we're thinking about the urgency of the present. And sometimes when you're thinking of survival in the present, anxiety isn't always an emotion that comes up. You're just in survival mode and trying to get your basic needs met. However, eco-anxiety is a very real thing, and I'm sure it's something that I experience and many people experience, but it's hard to be anxious about the future when I'm not even anxious about the present. I've accepted what's happening in the present, and I'm just trying to fight for people having their basic human environmental needs and rights right now. So yes. I don't know, but I do have anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot going on. And I know if you're environmentally aware at all, and an activist, and involved with, intersectionality, that there are so many places to sort of stop and to get burnt out, and that's been one of the big perils in activism. Is that something that you're aware of, and how do you sort of navigate that?
I feel like climate optimism, so going back to social media, I founded a social media platform called Intersectional Environmentalist.
And she wrote a book.
And I wrote a book.
She wrote a book.
Of the same name. But so this is just social media engagement in the last year and then going back to 2020. So in 2020, our content that was negative about environmental injustice and trauma and anti-racism had really high engagement and was being shared. But then come to 2022, it's the complete opposite. Our content that we talk about joy and hope and climate solutions, and it's not just about trauma, and we're highlighting Black and brown environmentalists or talking about really cool things like queer ecology. Those are the things that are being engaged with the most and shared the most on social media with our Gen Z and millennial audience. So I feel like we've been scared. It's been, 10 or 15 years since Al Gore's first documentary. They have successfully scared us, and I don't think the youth can take it anymore. So focusing on climate hope, solutions, all those beautiful stories, I feel like that's what people want, and that's what I want, and that's what gives me a lot of hope.
Excellent. Yeah.
This is hard because I work with a lot of young people that I've seen burn themselves into the ground. Like, just get up at 6 in the morning, make a bunch of phone calls for an action or whatever they're organizing, skip out on lunch instead of eating, they're sending emails, and then go home and get on a meeting and another meeting and then do homework and then go to sleep and do it again. And I think we haven't, honestly, as organizers, have a lot of time sometimes to hold space for like climate optimism. And I think it's hard when, like you said, a lot of young people are just fighting to get to the next day. Like they're just fighting to be able to like have a grocery store near their house or feel safe on public transportation or get to school on time or just get out of bed. And so it's tough trying to fight against something like burnout. I will say that going back to organizing, that collective organizing is again where I think we find a lot of our energy to keep going, is the solidarity and the like, if your legs give out, it's okay because we're gonna stand right next to you and hold you up and we're just gonna keep going to the finish line. And I know it can be difficult, but I don't know what it is about young people that they'll just keep going, like broken leg. I had literally last protest, one of our organizers had a literal broken leg and got on a scooter and was chant leading on the scooter, like just kept going. And I'm not really sure what it is, but I think seeing other young people do that, and again, organizing, being with community, being with people, seeing each other get up and do it, even when you're tired, even when you're broken, even when you're hungry and you don't want to go anymore, just keep pushing, because this is life and death for people. And honestly, I don't know how that adds to burnout or if it's going to give any motivation, but I just have to be truthful about the fact that we as young people, especially in the Bay Area, who are dealing with environmental racism, dealing with environmental disaster, we're still trying to figure it out, but all I can say is that we're still going, so I hope that you guys will join us too.
All right. We asked the audience, we're gonna go to the audience now. We asked you for the places you find solace in the midst of all of this, and Ayana to my left, I believe.
Hi, I love what you just said. I have to say, please don't get burnt out. Rest is restorative and rest is justice, because people of color have built this country and we do not get to rest. Working class people have been doing the organizing. So what you should do is get an accomplice, not an ally. This was a comment, and what I do is engage with folks like you. I teach undergraduates, I'm raising children, and I love to be in community, and that is what helps me to deal with the grief and being tapped into the collective wound of what is happening on the earth. The symptoms come through the individuals, but the culture is sick. So really, what you're doing is what you should be doing, but we should be making ways for you to rest and restore, because when we're long gone, you and who come after you, like my children who are 7 and 12, will be dealing with the messes that our grandparents and great-grandparents created.
Right, thank you, Ayana. And we're gonna hear from Ayana later. She's an Octavia Butler scholar, so she is gonna be on a panel, an amazing panel later today. Yeah, I mean, do you feel a degree of resentment? I mean, you're young in the world and so much has been saddled on you, you know, and how much are you just like,
I mean,
yeah, I mean, you know, like the sort of the rage of that on top of what you're dealing with in terms of, Black and brown communities getting hurt first, worst, and longest by this.
Naomi Little Bear has a quote that I read just yesterday that says, "Complacency is a far more worse attitude than outrage." And I think outrage is a really big and heavy emotion for us to carry, but I think when I think about the tribulations my ancestors had to go through, just for me to be able to sit on a stage like this or get an education or vote, it just reminds me that maybe this feeling is nothing in comparison to what they felt. Maybe it's nothing in comparison to what the next person's gonna feel. And yeah, I think resentment comes up sometimes, but I think when I'm out there and I'm organizing and I'm at stuff like this, I just kind of have to push it to the side because it's really not about how I feel as a person sometimes, more as what message do I need to bring, what do I need to contribute, what do I need to hear so that in the next circle I'm in, I can take that with me. So as a person, it's not really about me, it's about the content and what the issue at hand, which is climate justice.
Leah, what about yourself?
I'm not mad at my ancestors, like you said, especially, it's interesting, yeah, like, it's hard.
Not at your ancestors, just about like a burden, like a sense of we're shouldering too much because we're young people having to face this more than older people will have to.
It's interesting, especially being 27 and the climate movement. A lot of the youth, they call me their climate auntie, and I'm still in my 20s, which is interesting. So I don't know if I feel angry with the older folks, because again, the older folks that I know are my ancestors or my grandparents who did not cause this climate crisis in large part. So I do feel some levels of resentment towards the systems that have caused this, but I don't know, I feel like I'm at that point where I just can't get any angrier, I hope. So I don't know, I can't tap into that anymore.
Right, and what you were saying too, you're shifting from, you grew up with the Al Gore film that I suddenly am blanking on the name of the Al Gore film. The Inconvenient Truth, sorry. And that there needs to be a shift to solutions, to climate optimism, to climate hope. Do you see that happening?
For sure, and I think, like what you were saying, why I don't feel resentment is because it makes complete sense that the same folks who created the systems that exploited my people and indigenous peoples would also create systems that would exploit the planet. So I'm just past the point of anger and not acceptance. And it is really interesting to think that Gen Zers grew up in a world where Al Gore's film existed, and that's all that they knew. I was maybe in the 1st or 2nd grade, but Gen Zers are not okay. This isn't your question, but there's a study from Futera, which I love, that shows that millennials, while they pull really high with climate pessimism, Gen Zers are in the climate fatalism category. So we need to shake things up. They've been successfully scared for a very long time. Eco-anxiety is just so rampant amongst the youth. So it is working. People like joyful stories. We're seeing organizations like GRIST talk about joy a little bit more, and it's working. So I think we've gone all the way over here to fatalism, and maybe we can get a little bit closer to optimism or meet somewhere in the middle.
Hear, hear. And Hannah, what about yourself? Do you see a shift, or is it something that, do you have to sort of pay attention to what you're paying attention to?
Yeah, I would say I definitely have to shut off my phone sometimes, delete my social media apps, get rid of the news apps even sometimes, because seeing disaster after disaster or like a blocked policy after blocked policy, it can be very disappointing. And I would say that there are times where I have to kind of remind myself of this beautiful collective in the climate movement that is going on, and look for those things, like look for the happy stories, to kind of remind myself like there is progress being made, even if it feels slow to me. So yeah, I do have to monitor what I watch a lot.
Leah, I want to touch briefly on your book, or just tell us about your book and and the platform, the Intersectional Environmentalist. Tell us what that is, and maybe how emotional resilience fits in, if at all.
Absolutely. So the Intersectional Environmentalist, How to Dismantle Systems of Oppression and Protect People and Planet, came out in March, and it's all about just studying Black feminist theory and intersectional theory and examining, like you were talking about, who is experiencing the brunt of the climate crisis. And I wrote the book and created the platform because I think if environmentalists, as young as possible, know that there are people who look like them, who were always a part of environmental history, their stories weren't just always told, that it might inspire a new generation of folks to understand that the environment is something that they are a part of. We're all a part of this great big ecosystem. So it's all about just sharing diverse climate stories, whether it's religious climate leaders, Black and brown folks talking about queer ecology, because yeah, I don't want environmentalism to be something that's just kept at like snobby academic institutions.
Yes, no, definitely we don't want that. So we're running out of time, but I'm going to ask you both a last question. What would you say needs to happen on a systemic level for communities to be prepared to cope emotionally and otherwise with the climate crisis?
That is a big question, and I'm not sure I have the expertise to answer that, but what I will do is speak specifically to Bay Area, because that's where we're at, and specifically to the comment that you made about rest and restoration and how that is important to this movement. And I want to say that there are a lot of smaller grassroots groups who are being led by people of color, who are being led by youth of color. Youth versus Apocalypse is one of them. And we are working in schools to kind of do what you said, which is remind people that the climate movement isn't this big faraway thing, but it's happening now, and it's happening in front of them, and it's probably happening in their own community. But those groups really need to be funded, and those groups really need to have the funding to rest. That's one of the issues that we see, is that we don't have capacity to do all the things we need to do in schools, to be there in all the ways we need to be there for young people. And so the only way that I can grasp what does preparing look like on a systemic level is getting those groups the funding they need, the resources that they need to do the great, amazing work that they do, whether that's fixing the food system in their neighborhood, or working in the schools that they're at, or working on restorative justice circles and bringing that into our communities. Whatever that is, it's all interconnected in the climate crisis. And so that's really the only answer I think I could give.
Excellent answer. And Leah, what about you?
Completely agree. And also so the Solutions Project did a really great study that shows that unfortunately environmental justice organizations, like you were saying, that are led by people of color receive less than 2% of philanthropic funding in the environmental space. The majority of it is going to conservation-based organizations, which is, I want to save the whales, but I want to remind us that people of color, we are also a part of this great big ecosystem. So just echoing what you said, that we need funding. People of color, we are the bearers of our own solutions. We have the solutions, we have the passion, we have the activists, and we need funding to scale some of those solutions.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you, Hannah Estrada and Leah Thomas. We loved having you here today. Sorry. So now I would like to welcome to the stage. Oh, I think I'm standing up for this part. Okay. So obviously, we talked about emotional tools and needing them. And for me, I wish I could just say, now I have this tool that I can use forever. Every day I have to remind myself, okay, I have to do things to, where am I moving? Oh, Lord, okay. But one of the people who's really helped me deal with climate anxiety and grief has been our next guest, Cara Brach. Tara, welcome to the stage. Psychologist, author, and meditation teacher, whose podcast everyone should listen to because it's amazing. It's balm for the soul. So welcome to the stage. So glad you're here.
It's a pleasure. And oh my gosh, a big bow to Hannah and Leah. What an amazing energy.
Yes. Yeah. So we just heard from Hannah and Leah about their challenges, like emotional, and dealing with like a lot of historic pain around the climate crisis. And we also know that people often burn out working on this or get paralyzed or just disconnected by the enormity of it all. So how natural is this? And then how can people cope with this?
Well, it's completely natural to get numb and disconnected. I mean, I think most people, unless there's an immediacy with the contact of the suffering, most of us, it's a little bit abstract. And there's a few reasons. I mean, one of the big reasons is we're not primed to think of planetary change. We're primed to think of what's most immediate that's dangerous. Another is that we get habituated. We're getting used to climate disasters. It's actually, it's not like, oh my God, it's like, oh, that again, you know? And the deepest, I think, is that it's so traumatizing to really get that we're in a collapse on all levels of life systems. It's so traumatizing that we dissociate. And then what happens when we dissociate is that we freeze, you know, we're not active. There's this leakage of the anxiety that has been talked about.
When you say leakage of the anxiety, it sounds like to me like you're armoring up and trying to sort of not think about it a little bit. And is that what you mean, like the leakage? Like what happens with the leakage of anxiety? What does that mean?
It feels like this background that gets, you know, anxiety is like gets fixated on whatever's right in front of us. So we might feel like we're anxious what's right around the corner about some presentation we have to do or a deadline. But there's this background of really feeling the fragility of our species and of all life systems. It's in the background.
And what are the perils of being disconnected? Like why, it doesn't sound that, I mean, if it's really traumatizing, why should we deal with it?
Yeah, and that's the question, which is if we're disconnected, if we don't feel, we can't adapt and respond. And really, if you think of evolution, if you think of evolutionary history, the way all organisms adapt and respond is they are sensitive to changes in the environment that they need to then mitigate, change their own beings. And that's why we're so slow in responding. And that's why we listen to these two. It's because so many who are in power, have money, make the decisions, are not the ones that are actually directly feeling the suffering.
And are there deeper roots of suffering? Like we spoke before, like the disconnection from the natural world and, you know, efforts to dominate, which you see as fear-driven, right? Can you tell us about that? Why that's fear-driven?
Yeah, well, it's our earliest conditioning, you know, of fear to sense I'm separate, the world's out there, objectify the world, objectify others, see an enemy, look for difference, and then defend or attack. I mean, that's our primal conditioning. So that's one strong force through history. I mean, you see Genesis saying dominate the world, or right. You know, the Manifest Destiny saying conquest, it's fine, go ahead, because Earth is other, and indigenous peoples are other right. to those that are dominant. And that othering has caused the suffering on this planet, and it keeps going today. And simultaneously, what makes us, our true accomplishments have come out of collaboration, out of perceiving a sense of belonging, out of being able to network, out of being able to really sense, oh, we have the same experience, and care, and widen the circles of caring.
So for you, how do you deal with the pain of what's happening? I mean, you're very open, you work to reconnect all the time, but pain is painful. I mean, it's very hard. It's very hard to process these things.
So I just took a breath, because that's part of it. It's that sacred art of pausing, you know, that in some way we sense, oh, this moment I need to be in touch more. So that's one piece. But I think for me, what has been most important is intentionally leaning into where there is suffering. Like I force myself to pay attention to things I might not pay attention to. And so, for example, I have friends in Puerto Rico that are part of a training program I'm doing. Puerto Rico got creamed, and then it got creamed again, you know. They never got back their power, houses gone, you know, drinking water not available, to really talk to them and find out the details so I could sense, oh, what's it like being you?
we're going to ask you to speak a little.
Speak louder. I'm sorry. I warned them that I have a soft voice. It's that meditation voice, you know. I have friends in Pakistan, and it's hard for me to talk about the heartbreak when I really register a third of that country underwater, and what is it, like 70% of their crops gone, and the grain that's been stored for people to eat. I mean, it's like it was said twice or three times, it's not in the future. This suffering and crisis is now.
Right.
So you asked, how do I deal with it? I let myself feel it, because we have to feel it. There's a wise sage that different people would go to with their problems, and he'd swear them to silence. And then he'd say, I have one question, and that is, what are you unwilling to feel? And it's that. It's really sensing what is really hard to feel about our world. So that's the beginning. And then we need ways to, you use the word metabolize. We need to be able to metabolize.
Your approach, you have a wonderful approach and a wonderful meditation called RAIN. Recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. It's about creating space for difficult feelings. Can you talk a little bit about that? And why would we want to invite them in? Can't we just be in denial?
You say that so pleadingly. It's that disconnect. The denial is the biggest threat to our survival. You know, all species survival is human denial. So that's why not.
Right, that's a good reason.
Just a little reminder. But we have to be able to be wise in how we open to it, because it doesn't help to re-traumatize ourselves. So this is a practice that we will do together, and it's a weave of mindfulness and compassion. And it's a way to bring that to whatever's going on for us. And for many of us, it's not going to be an immediate sense of anger about what's going on with the climate. It'll get put as anger towards somebody in our lives or towards ourselves, but we need to know how to work with the emotions that come up. So, for example, one woman who was, every time she would hear the news, she would feel that incredible anxiety about what's the future going to bring. And with RAIN, she would recognize the anxiety, take that pause, allow it, just say, okay, let it be here for the moment, investigate it, and sense the clutch in her body. And then the nurturing, that's the N of RAIN, was to say, thank you for trying to protect me. You know, I'm okay right now. Thank you. And in that there was more space, and she could begin to see a way of, and again it was mentioned, that she really needed to remember other people care, other people are feeling this too, which is so powerful. I mean, you open the session saying, never have there been so many people. We have to remember that. That's one of the ways of nurturing, is remembering, oh, I'm with others that care. And then for another guy who was working for the EPA during the Trump administration, and he ended up leaving, but he was so filled with anger at all the ways that climate science wasn't being paid attention to, and all the blocks to any effort to help, that he had to work with his anger with RAIN. And he recognized the anger, allow it to be there, investigate and find out under the anger there was fear. And under the fear, it's because he cared. And when he could get down to the caring, because always under anger, there's something we care about. When he could get down to the caring, then he could just say, you know, really be with himself. And I'll give you one more example, because it's despair, which is, you know, there really is, you know, climate grief, climate anxiety, climate despair. And I do a lot of online groups where we'll bring up things and practice RAIN together. And one person brought up her despair, the way the future looked, and another person did, and we did RAIN with that. Recognize the despair. Allow it. Let it be there. Don't push it away. Don't deny it. Don't judge it. Just make room. investigate. And then again, under the despair, deep under the despair, there was this grief. That's what hadn't been being felt, this grief. And when there was really opening to the grief, it was back to that there's something I love that I don't want to lose.
Right.
And it's such a powerful question. What do we love that we don't want to lose? And can we let ourselves feel the pain that it's so threatened? The beauty is so threatened. The nature is so threatened, our nature, our beloved fellow beings' nature. So that's the way that rain can help to get in touch with really the love that's underneath every difficult emotion.
I'm going to try and build verklempt. So, you know, Joanna Macy, who's a great, you know, environmental grief teacher based out here in the Bay Area, has said that, you know, the same thing, like your pain is the other side of your love for the world, which is a lovely way to look at it. It's a measure of it.
And if you haven't run into Joanna Macy, she
93.
is awesome. She's wonderful, and she really talks about if you open to the despair and grief, you actually find the love and the empowerment.
Yes, and I did one of her workshops. It was wonderful. So we're here in San Francisco, obviously, at a climate conference talking about potential technical solutions to the crisis. How much faith should we, or do you, put into the notion that tech could possibly save us?
You know, I think of one general of the Army who said that we're a world of, you know, nuclear genius and ethical infants. And that's so powerful, because think of it. I mean, we need technology, and technology is our tool and can do amazing, amazing things. So I bow to it. And if we don't wake up really emotionally and spiritually to know our belonging, if we don't wake up to realize it's not nature out there, that it's our nature, that this Earth's body is our larger body, if we don't wake up to know that interdependence, or what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing, he says what we have to learn to do is to feel the earth crying inside us. If that doesn't happen, without that awakening, there will not be the political will, the emotional will, the spirit to get behind the changes that need to happen.
Do you sense a shift in that in the work you do?
I sense more and more beings waking up, and we need a critical mass. I mean, that's what this is. This is an expression. I mean, I really feel so much of a gratitude towards the times holding this in each one of you. I can feel the energy and the heart and the care. That's what's needed. And we can't do it alone. I mean, we have to know that belonging. And again, Hannah and Leah, a bow, because we will not have the energy, we won't have the trust in what's possible if we don't get together.
So shifting a little bit, what are ways we can do to connect? Maybe in how we are eating, or what are practical things we can do to connect?
So one thing is, and this is really kind of an inquiry for you, is do you share with others how you feel about really the collapse of life systems, of what's really happening? I mean, how often do you talk from the heart with others? Because I've found the times that I do, and I really am doing it from that place where I'm in touch, there's a healing moment in that we love this world together. So one thing is just to talk with each other. You know, the movie Don't Look Up, it's like, look up together and hold hands is one piece. You know, I love the word hope when it's understood properly. I'm not into the kind of optimism that hitches what's going to happen to certain outcomes.
Hopium.
Hopium,
Yeah.
Thank you, hopium. And hopium is, what happens with hopium is that we then don't think we need to do anything. We forget that we're part of this evolving world that needs to participate. But there's radical hope, and I think of it as spiritual hope, that intuits the possibility and stays open to the possibility of really love and awareness guiding us. It's like the Dalai Lama had a beautiful, beautiful reminder to a group of teachers, which was to really trust the power of heart and awareness to awaken through all circumstances. To put our trust in that and know that if we awaken in that way, the technology will be used and empowered in a direction that can make a difference.
Hannah and Leah also spoke about, and being very aware of the reality of burnout on this, because if you're fixed to a certain outcome, your heart is going to break over and over on this. And you have talked about the distinction between empathy and compassion. So can you describe the distinction and why nurturing one over the other might help ward off?
This is good, and this is neuroscience's refinement that I think is really, really useful. Empathy is when you can feel another's feelings. It's you care, you're feeling what's going on. Compassion has that, but it also has the quality of mindfulness that has a big enough perspective so you don't get hitched or possessed or overwhelmed by what you're feeling. And also compassion is geared to go then act because you care. In fact, the compassion center in the relational network in the brain is very close to the motor cortex. So with compassion, it moves to action, and we need to act. I mean, action absorbs anxiety, but it does more than that. When we act, we start realizing our belonging. We feel part of it. I mean, right now, my energies are going in specific towards vote. Save democracy, because it feels like without democracy, it's going to be very hard to get behind anything necessary to save the planet. And I'm working with people on just the feeling like we care and we're trying. We don't know the outcome, but we need to try.
You've described sort of this, you've used a metaphor of being lost in a forest and making a clearing for yourself. And there's a poem by Martha Postlewaite. Oh, I hope I said it right.
Is it right?
That imagines this. I'm wondering if you could read this poem, and then we'll go into the meditation. Okay.
Yeah, this is my cue to pull out my piece of paper, because I don't have it memorized. But so what we're going to do is I am going to read this to you and then invite you into a short rain meditation. So even now you might, if you need to make any adjustments in how you're sitting, if you want to put down a pad of paper,
Turn off phone.
just invite yourself into.
Yeah, maybe turn off a phone if you have them on.
Oh, please. So this poem by Martha Postlewaite speaks to the necessity that if we're to metabolize, if we're to process the enormity of what's here, we need to be able to pause. We need to create some space. We need to bring our attention inward and tend to our inner life. She writes this, she says, "Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours to sing falls into your open-cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to the world so worthy of rescue. Don't try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life. Create a clearing in the dense forest of your life." So in that spirit, I'd like to invite you, if you haven't already, to close your eyes or let your gaze be downcast and let your attention go inward. Take these few moments to pause and sense the possibility of getting a little more intimate with your inner life. You might feel the breath and take a few long, deep breaths. let the breath help to collect your attention, to bring you right here. You might scan your body and sense what wants to let go a little. Maybe your shoulders. Maybe softening your hands. Relaxing the belly and letting the breath go deep into the abdomen. With the practice of rain, we bring our attention to places where we might feel stuck, reactive. So to give you a taste, we'll call this a light rain. Give you a taste, just to invite you to scan your life right now and sense anywhere that you feel you leave yourself in some way. You get reactive, either angry at another person, anxious. Perhaps you turn on yourself in self-judgment. Just looking through the last couple of days and sense someplace, maybe it's repeating, where you find you kind of go into a trance, you get smaller, get tighter. Might be in a relationship, might be at work, might be in relating to yourself, maybe an addictive behavior. I would steer away from something traumatic, because that won't serve you in a brief reflection. When you've arrived on something, go right to a situation, a very real situation that exemplifies it. And see the surroundings you're in. If there's another person, the look on their face, perhaps hearing the words that are said. So if you're watching a movie, go right to the part of the movie, the frame where you get triggered, where you get reactive, most angry or fearful, defensive, down on yourself, whatever it is. Freezing the frame there. Begin rain by just recognizing whatever the strongest emotion is that's going on. And you might mentally whisper it. And there may be more than one, maybe two. Might be anger, frustration, fear, anxiety, sorrow, shame. It's mentally whispering what you're aware of. And then allow it to be there without adding any judgment. In some way you're saying, okay, this belongs. It's like the waves in the ocean. This wave belongs. Let it be there. And you might start investigating by just sensing, well, what am I believing right now? What's the limiting belief right now, that deep belief about myself or about others? That I'm failing, that I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, that I've hurt others, that I can't trust others, that something very bad's about to happen. What's the belief? And whether or not you immediately hop on a belief, and it does, either way is fine, feel in your body where the feeling is the strongest. The throat, the chest, the belly. Let your attention go there, that this is where feeling is. Maybe this is what you've been unwilling to feel. But part of creating a clearing is to feel what's here. And as a way of supporting that, you might put your hand gently on your heart. If you've never done it before, just explore that you can have the touch be tender. So you're actually communicating a tender presence with what's here. Feeling where there's vulnerability. being present with it. And just ask that place in you, what do you most need right now? You know, what's the kind of comfort that you need? Do you need to trust in yourself? Do you need some deep kind of spiritual hope? Do you need forgiveness, acceptance, love, being held? And as if you could be listening from the most wise, witnessing part of you, just offer some message inward right now, some message to yourself that you sense will be healing. It might be simply, I'm here and I'm not leaving. Or it might be like that woman I mentioned, thank you for trying to protect me. I'm okay right now. Or it might be, trust your goodness. Or just, it's okay. But something to bring you presence and comfort and tenderness. And just notice what happens. Notice what happens when you offer yourself a message of nurturing. As one psychologist said, it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the nurtured. That the beginning of reconnecting with our world is to reconnect with our inner life. Feeling, breathing, sensing a larger sense of your being. Notice the shift from when you started, whether you were feeling the anger or the fear or the grief or the guilt, to a little more presence and spaciousness. And then as you sense your world, there's a really beautiful inquiry about how we then move forward. And it is, what would love have me do today? So you might reframe that in any language that works for you. What does your deepest heart want for these next minutes, next days, next months? What would love have you do? And this might be an inquiry you take with you as you move forward in time, but for now you might take a few full breaths. And as you're ready, if your eyes are closed, open your eyes, come back. And thank you for being willing to explore rain. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.